3 months after the tragedy, I'd lost all semblance of a normal life. I didn't know who I was outside of what happened at Yarnell. I'd never really grieved for my brothers. I'd become their spokesperson in a way, and I was glad to do it, but I felt like I was losing my mind. Not having my brothers around was hell. Not having the job came a close second. There's nothing I'd have liked better than to grab my Pulowski and head out with a crew to a hill fire and just work a wildfire, 14 days straight like we used to. But I couldn't, mostly because of my daughter. Michaela was still anxious from the days when I'd say goodbye and disappear for 2 weeks. Anytime I got up to go to the grocery store or go to the target range with my compound bow, she'd come running to me. "Daddy, no firefighting, right?" Her face scrunched up as her eyes searched mine for an answer. "No, baby, no firefighting." I got tears in my eyes, but I smiled. She knew about Yarnell. We'd drive around town and see guys wearing Granite Mountain Memorial t-shirts, and we'd see cars with stickers on them, and she'd get happy. "That's Daddy's work." She knew about Yarnell, but she didn't understand. What else was I qualified to do outside of fighting fires? I had few marketable skills, unless you want to call selling pot a marketable skill. Hotshotting was what made me a father. It was the only thing I had to provide for Michaela. Now the one person I'd do anything for didn't want me to do the one thing I knew how to do and do well. That was a riddle I couldn't solve. I went to work for the Wildland Firefighter Foundation, which helps families of fallen and injured hotshots. I spoke with families. I encouraged guys who'd been burned to get help. I enjoyed the work, but in a way, I was a hypocrite. I was avoiding therapy. I was surrounding myself with people who'd been through similar tragedies, but I wasn't taking my own advice. I was reliving the tragedy every day in the work I did, but I didn't feel I deserved help. I felt it was only right of me to give and not receive. The fire affected everyone around me, not just Michaela. My mom had been working as a house sitter for a wealthy family on the outskirts of Prescott. When the fire happened, she'd heard the choppers coming in. She sat in the empty house and imagined me dying. After Yarnell, she quit that job. Working in the house reminded her of how close I'd come to not being there. She wanted to be happy that I was still around, but she was surrounded by mothers who didn't have their sons. She didn't want to make a big deal about her happiness. She knew the guys, Chris especially. We'd spent Thanksgiving and Christmas together. She was mourning them at the same time she was trying to celebrate. It's a strange thing to be a lone survivor. Everyone is happy you made it out, but still, you're a reminder that no one else did. No one can be completely happy you're still here, not even your mother. A year after the tragedy, Natalie moved to Phoenix, so twice a week I drove to Cortez Junction, which is a halfway point between her place and Prescott. Natalie would be waiting at the gas station we'd chosen, and I'd drop Michaela off or pick her up. On the way there or back, Michaela and I would laugh and talk and scream about her favorite song, and when they came on the radio, competing to see who could sing the loudest. I loved those rides, especially when I picked her up. Then I had a week with her to look forward to. Those hours were the center of my life. But as the weeks went by, I found I was bonding less to my daughter. I wasn't as sad when I dropped her off or as happy when I picked her up. I had less emotion, period. I was just drifting, a blank person. Michaela sensed the change in me. She's a smart kid. She would ask me if anything was wrong, and I saw her eyes searching my face for the old signs of silliness. I tried to sing her songs, but my voice sounded fake. I couldn't even manufacture enough emotion to fool a 3-year-old. I felt like a robot whose battery was running down. One Monday in the summer of 2014, Michaela and I were driving to the halfway point, and I was telling Michaela how much I loved her. She nodded, tapping her foot to the music. I could hear my voice go on and on, flatlined. The emotion seemed to have drained out a hole in the bottom of my heart. While she looked at the passing cars with the passenger window, I cried, knowing I wouldn't see her for another week. We reached Cortez Junction, and I spotted Natalie. Michaela was trying to see over the seat to get a glimpse of her mom, super excited. I parked the truck, got out, went around, and opened Michaela's door, undid her seatbelt, and picked her up. As I was setting her on the ground, she wiggled free and ran off to jump into her mother's arms. She was laughing and yelling. "She can't wait to get away from you," I thought. That hit me hard. I could see that Michaela lit up when she saw her mom, and it was only then that I realized how much my depression was affecting her. It's a relief to get away from you, and that thought was a killer. Years ago, before Granite Mountain, I'd said to myself, get sober for Michaela or kill yourself. I'd gotten sober, but now I was holding her back again. I was a negative force in her life. I was hurting her just by being around. I got back in the truck. I started it up and turned around, got on Route 17 back toward Prescott. It's time to go. I thought, you're making Michaela sad. You might be damaging her for life. You're a failure as a dad. A little more than halfway home, I pulled over to the side of the road, the tires slipping and grinding on the gravel there. I sat for a moment with the motor running, the radio playing some commercial for an auto dealer. Then I reached in my glove compartment and pulled out my 9mm. I had only one thought in my head. I can't do this anymore. I was so empty. There was no hope for me. It was as if I could see my life stretching out for the next 50 years, and every single day looked the same. Depressed, hopeless, and each day I would rob a little more color out of my daughter's life. The PTSD was only getting worse. The nightmares were only going to get worse. The depression would deepen. I laid my gun on the passenger seat. All that lay between me and my brothers was 5 pounds of trigger pull. Cars and trucks were shooting by on my left, people in the windows on their way to whatever, jobs, kids, home. I felt so separated from them. I should have done more at Yarnell, I thought. Tears were stinging my eyes. I could have done something. I'm responsible for Yarnell. How exactly, I'm not sure. But I could have saved those guys. What does a lookout do? He looks out for his friends. Fucking simple enough. So why didn't I do it? Memories of the fire came back to me in vivid detail. I heard Granite Mountain crew members' last call on their radio. Air attack, Granite Mountain 7. In that horrible, anguished voice. Then the noises of the saws in the background, the sirens, the smells, the rush of the hills, the body bags, the funerals. It was a flood of images and sensations. I reached down and picked up the gun in my right hand. I felt the weight of the thing in my hand. Just put it to your temple and get it over with. Go be with your friends. Best thing for everyone. There was another memory flickering in my head. Me and Michaela 2 hours before in my house dancing to a song on the radio. I thought about that for a minute. The cars droned on by. I thought of the guys who would find me with my brain splattered all over the truck window. The word getting to my relatives and friends. The looks of shock and grief on their faces, then the families of the 19 going through it all over again. More horrible shit all around. I thought about Michaela growing up thinking her dad hadn't fought hard enough to stay with her. I felt as if there were balance in my head, with one side weighed down with reasons to live and the other with reasons to die. That little sliver of thought seemed to tip the scales. I didn't want to be a coward in my daughter's memory. I very much wanted to kill myself at that moment, but the cost for everyone else would just be too high. There was no rush of happiness. Reluctantly, I racked the gun, and the bullet from the chamber popped out and landed on the passenger seat. I pulled out the magazine and threw it, and the gun into the back seat. I pulled the truck in gear and spun the tires in the gravel as I accelerated back to the highway. I needed help, but I still wouldn't go to therapy. Too stubborn, too afraid to admit I needed help. Soon after that incident in the fall of 2014, more than a year after the tragedy, I traveled to 2 memorials for Granite Mountain hotshots. After the first one was over, the thoughts of suicide returned. The second one was at the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial. After it was over, a bunch of firefighters and their family went to a local bar to talk and reminisce. At one point, I was standing alone, a beer in my hand, pain churning in my heart. A woman came up to me, a therapist from Phoenix that I'd met earlier. Her name was Carrie. She had calmness about her. I was anything but calm. So how are you doing, Brendan? Such a simple question. I looked at her. You really want to know? Yes, I do. I feel like shit. I feel like this is never going to end. She nodded. The words began to pour out of me, how I felt trapped in an endless cycle of guilt, anger, sorrow, and disgust that I was still alive. The memorials just brought it all back. I must have talked for half an hour, and the woman just nodded and held my gaze. Within a week, I was in counseling with a therapist Carrie found for me in Prescott. It saved my life.